Mothers went into labor, but never left with their babies. One by one, the newborns vanished, taken before they could even cry. No one questioned it. No one dared. Because behind the closed doors of the delivery room, a terrifying secret was being kept. But what happens when someone finally asks the question? Where do the babies go? The desert had always been a land of silence, a place where time moved slowly, where the wind carried whispers of things long forgotten. Here, in the endless stretch of sand, beneath a sun that showed no mercy, men and women had learned to survive through quiet obedience. In a village on the edge of this vast emptiness, there was a man named Bakary. He was old, his face lined with years of wisdom, his hands steady with the weight of tradition. People sought him for advice, for blessings, for guidance. He spoke with the certainty of a man who had seen generations come and go, who knew the secrets of the land and the laws that governed it. Among the many things he did for the village, there was one task that only he could perform. It was a responsibility passed down through the ages, one that required patience, persuasion, and a careful hand. When a woman found herself alone, abandoned by the man who had made promises he would not keep, Bakary was there. He would speak to her in hushed tones, reassuring, understanding. He would tell her that life was hard, that raising a child without a father was a burden no woman should carry alone. And then, when her heart wavered, he would offer a solution. A chance for the child to have a better life, far away, in a place where food was plenty, where kind hands would raise them with love. The women wept, some resisted, but in the end, many relented. The promise of relief was too tempting, the alternative too cruel. Fanta had heard these stories before. She had watched the other women, their empty arms wrapped around their broken spirits, their eyes filled with something they could not name. But Fanta was different. When her time came, when she found herself in that same desperate place, she did not bend. She listened, she nodded, but in her heart, she did not believe. And when the moment arrived, when the village slept and Bakary made his journey into the desert with her child, she followed. The truth she would find beyond the dunes was nothing she could have prepared for. The night was thick with silence, the kind that settled deep into the bones. The village slept, unaware of the lone figure moving through the shadows. Fanta's bare feet pressed into the sand, her breath shallow, her heart beat a steady drum against her ribs. She had been watching Bakary for weeks, memorizing his movements, listening for the soft creak of his door in the dead of night. And when it happened, when he slipped away under the cover of darkness, she knew this was her only chance. Ahead of her, the old man moved with a quiet purpose. A single lantern swung in his grip, casting long, distorted shadows across the dunes. He walked as if he had done this 100 times before, his pace steady, unwavering. Fanta followed, keeping low, her hands trembling with a fear she did not dare name. She knew the desert could be cruel, that people who wandered too far never returned. But this was her child. No force on earth could keep her from knowing the truth. For hours, she trailed him. The village had long since disappeared behind her, swallowed by the shifting sands. The air was thick with heat, even in the dead of night, and every step felt heavier than the last. Then, just as doubt began to creep into her mind, Bakary stopped. In the distance, the glow of fire flickered against the darkness, and beyond it, the outline of something unnatural rose from the desert floor. A structure, ancient and unmoving, standing where no man should have built anything. Fanta's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary journey. This was something else. And she was no longer sure she wanted to see where it led. The structure stood in the distance, half buried in the sand, its edges softened by time but its presence undeniable. It was old, far older than the village, perhaps older than the desert itself. Even from where she crouched, Fanta could feel it, a strange weight in the air, thick and pressing, as if the ground itself held its breath in anticipation. Bakary moved forward with the certainty of a man who had walked this path many times. His lantern cast weak, flickering light against the stone, revealing carvings along the surface, symbols Fonta did not recognize, lines and shapes that seemed to shift under the dim glow. He reached the entrance and hesitated, his head bowing slightly, as though in silent prayer. Then, he stepped inside. Fonta's body refused to move. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to flee into the desert before she saw something she was not meant to see. But the thought of her child forced her forward. She crept closer, the heat of the fire growing against her skin. As she neared the entrance, she saw them, small footprints in the sand, leading inside. Tiny, delicate imprints, unmistakable in their shape. Her breath caught. Her baby had been here. Her baby was still here. Swallowing the fear rising in her throat, she placed one hand against the cold stone and stepped into the darkness. The air inside was different, heavy, unmoving, thick with something ancient. It smelled of earth and something else, something faintly metallic, like rusted iron left too long in the sun. The glow of Bakary's lantern bobbed ahead, casting long shadows along the walls. Fonta pressed herself against the stone, breath shallow, ears straining for any sound beyond the soft shuffle of his feet. The chamber was vast, larger than she had expected. The walls were lined with more of the strange carvings, twisting symbols that seemed almost alive in the flickering light. But it was what lay in the center of the room that stopped her breath. A stone altar, smooth and polished, sat beneath an opening in the ceiling where the moon's pale light spilled through like an unholy blessing. Around it, remnants of cloth, brittle with age, lay scattered. The sight of them sent ice through her veins. They were baby wraps, too small for anything else, abandoned in silence. Fonta's hands clenched into fists. Her child was supposed to be in a warm home, cradled by loving arms. But this was not a place of kindness. This was not a place for life. She had been lied to. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the reach of Bakary's lantern, her baby was waiting. She had come too far to turn back now. Bakary moved with slow precision, setting the lantern at the altar's edge. He reached into the folds of his robe, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. Fonta's stomach twisted. The bundle barely moved, but she knew with every fiber of her being, that it was her child. She bit down on her lip to stop herself from crying out. One sound, one misstep, and she would be discovered. She watched as Bakary unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing the tiny form beneath. The baby did not cry. Fonta's heart pounded. Her child had always been restless, always reaching, always searching. But now, the stillness was unnatural. Bakary lifted the baby with careful hands, stepping toward the altar. He looked up at the opening in the ceiling, murmuring something under his breath. The words were too soft to hear, but their weight filled the room. Fonta's body trembled. This was not an act of mercy. This was something else. Fonta moved before she could think, instinct overtaking fear. She darted from the shadows, her feet barely making a sound against the stone. Bakary's back was to her, his focus on the altar. He did not hear her approach, until it was too late. With all her strength, she slammed into him, knocking him forward. The baby slipped from his grasp, falling onto the altar's surface. Bakary stumbled, his lantern toppling over, rolling across the floor. The flame flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows along the walls. Bakary turned, shock flashing in his eyes. Then, anger. "You do not understand what you are doing," he hissed. Fonta ignored him. She lunged for her child, scooping the baby into her arms. The warmth of the tiny body sent relief flooding through her, but it was short-lived. Behind her, Bakary moved. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into her arm as he yanked her back. "You cannot take the child," he said, his voice low, steady. "This is bigger than you, bigger than me. If you live with that child, you do most or. Fanta struggled, twisting against his grasp. You lied, she spat. You told them their children would be safe. You told them they would have a better life. Bakary's expression darkened. And they do. A life beyond suffering, beyond hunger, beyond pain. His grip tightened. The desert takes what it is owed. If you do not give it freely, it will take from us all. Fanta's mind reeled. The words made no sense, yet there was certainty in his voice, an unshakable belief. But she did not care for his reasons, his traditions, or the weight he carried. This was a child. She would not let the desert have him. A sound echoed from deeper within the chamber. A low, guttural hum, like the breath of something waking from a long sleep. The air grew colder, the weight of it pressing against Fanta's skin. Bakary stiffened. Fanta did not wait. She wrenched herself free, clutching the baby close, and ran. She did not look back. She did not need to. The feeling of something watching, something waiting, pressed against her spine. She reached the entrance, feet slipping against the sand-covered stone. The desert stretched before her, endless and dark. But she did not stop. Behind her, the hum grew louder. And then, the whispers began. Fanta ran. The desert wind howled around her, whipping sand into her face, stinging her eyes. The whispers followed, rising and falling like voices carried on the wind. They spoke in a language she did not understand, yet the meaning pressed against her mind. Return the child. The weight in her arms grew heavier. The baby's breathing was too soft, too shallow. Fear clawed at her throat. She could not stop. She would not stop. Bakary's voice called out behind her, but she did not turn. His words were lost beneath the whispers. The wind shifted, and ahead, something loomed. A figure. No, not one, many. Tall, unmoving, wrapped in tattered cloth. Their faces were hidden, their hands folded in front of them. Fanta's steps faltered. The watchers. Bakary had not lied. The desert did not simply take, it demanded. The watchers were proof of that. One stepped forward, movement slow, deliberate. A voice, hollow and stretched, filled the space between them. You carry what is ours. Fanta's grip tightened on her child. He is mine. A pause. Then, he was promised. The wind howled. The watchers did not move. Fanta's mind raced. She could not fight them. She could not outrun them. There had to be another way. Fanta's voice was steady when she spoke. If he was promised, then let me take his place. A ripple moved through the watchers. The air trembled. You do not know what you offer, the voice intoned. But she did. She had always known. A mother does not hesitate. The watchers did not speak, but the air shifted. The whispers slowed. The wind stilled. A decision had been made. Bakary's cry of protest was lost in the silence. The weight in her arms lessened. Her child, taken. She did not fight. She had made her choice. The watchers closed in. The cold seeped into her bones. Her breath slowed. The whispers welcomed her. The desert had taken what it was owed. The village awoke to the cries of a baby at its gates. Wrapped in cloth, untouched by the desert's cruelty. A gift, a curse, no one knew which. Bakary stood in silence, staring at the child. His hands trembled. The mother was gone. The debt was paid. But the desert never forgets. Years passed. The child grew. The village whispered. And when the time came again, when the desert stirred in hunger, Bakary stood once more beneath the moon's pale light. A new mother wept. A new child was carried away. The cycle continued. The desert does not break its promises.